Hello and welcome to my session on Agentic AI. I'm going to be talking and coining a new term which I think is going to be the biggest thing in our industry around AI assurance. And so I'm going to explore that today with you in this session, which is about 30 minutes long. So first of all, a little introduction to myself. I'm Jonathan Wright. I'm known as the Automation Cyborg by people like Joe Colantonio. I've been working in automation specifically for the last 25 years. About the last 15 years, I've been building artificial intelligence systems. I was based out in Silicon Valley and I was running a cognitive engineering team. And we were building the first AI in testing tools about 12, 13 years ago. Since then, I've been building generative AI platforms, and then my R&D based out here in Cambridge has been building agentic AI systems for the last year and a half. So we've got some practical experience which I'm going to share with you today. So let me quickly rewind 7 years ago. So I had the opportunity to do a TED, and if you just go to the TED.com and you search for Jonathan Wright, and the topic was cognitive engineering, evolution over revolution, you'll be able to see my talk, and I introduced this topic of human augmentation. And really what I'm going to refer to today as tester in the loop, which is, how do you oversee these new AI systems? How do you become more productive? But also, how do you assure those systems that are being built? So let's just do a little bit of history. Let's go all the way back to 1939. And the company that I work for today is actually the original Hewlett-Packard that was building out test equipment in the garage in Silicon Valley. It was the birth of Silicon Valley. And more famously, a few miles from where I live at the moment, on the right-hand side in 1950, Alan Turing introduced his first initial papers on artificial intelligence. So we're talking about technology that dates back to 1950 and testing practices and principles that date back to 1939. So a very rich history, which I think we've all seen some great examples from, and also movies with Alan Turing. So a bit of a quick nod, and I spent this week with Diego from Forrester, who coined the concept of Turing bots, a nod to Alan Turing back in 2019 before ChatGPT-1 appeared and everyone got so excited with large language models, which I'm going to try and avoid today because I think there's a very subtle difference. And then I'm going to reverse back to that machine learning and what I'm going to refer to as classic ML and artificial intelligence, which dates back to 1950, and principles like you see on the right-hand side and in Bletchley Park. So let's get started. Now, of course, it'd be hard to start any talk on agentic AI without at least talking about large action models, which I think, again, has been what we were expecting to see this year in full force. We saw XLAM released by Salesforce last year, which gave us the ability to pretty much replace all web automations. That's the end of Selenium, which is great because, of course, Selenium being the cure for mercury poisoning, mercury being the 1990s kind of solutions that I was building, XRunner and then WinRunner kind of tool sets, which dominated the market. And of course, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll have probably heard of things like DeepSeek, which is very interesting from a political perspective in the sense of they were restricted with the 50,000 GPUs that they used to train them because China has a restriction on the amount of compute that they're allowed and the amount of memory they're allowed to access. So quite interesting of what they've brought through, which has really started bringing in this concept, which I'll explore further on today, around chain of thought. And I'm going to use the word chain of thought in the same way as the process of thinking, the going through and thinking process, which I think if you look in the bottom right hand corner here on this presentation, I drew on the board think, evolve and learn. And it was these three concepts of where I think now and that chain of thought is really where we're focusing with things like DeepSeek. But more importantly, I was wrong in my presentation because I took what you see in the backdrop here from Oxford at the time, saying, well, which are the careers, which are the jobs that are most at risk, right? And we're going to be talking a lot about the AI workforce because things like the Stargate 500 billion investment in AI infrastructure in the US, and then the UK government returning something very similar based out in Liverpool. I think part of it is we didn't expect, and all the way down in the bottom right hand corner, which you can't really see on here, was things like artists and musicians to be replaced. We expected accountants and finance and economics and all the stuff that's very structured and very susceptible to what I refer to or coined as statistical stitching, taking lots of information and bringing it together. So I think part of that is we know what we've seen now. We've seen these explosion of creativity tools like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, that are creating video and images. We've seen things like Sumo that are creating music in any language. So where are we going with this? Where are we heading? And this is where I want to talk today, and I really want to open your eyes to hopefully get some value in the topics that I'm going to be talking about. So I rewind a little bit further to a few years ago when I started talking about generative AI. And I think you've probably all seen this quote before around, AI won't replace you, but another human using AI tools will. And I was at Google DeepMind at the moment when I was talking about this, and I think I was opening up the whole point that if you are going to be left behind if you're not leveraging these tools to increase your productivity. And I think there's quite a few differences. We're talking about agentic AI when we're really talking about AI productivity tools within the workforce. We're talking about things like generative AI when we're talking about creation of assets, some kind of that might be helping you, support you with test design or test execution or test scripting, whatever that might be. And then we're talking about classical AI and machine learning when we're really talking about AI infused platforms, right? And of course, you probably all sit there going, well, all we're doing is just sticking ChatGPT API onto our products and fantastic. You should not be doing that, right? So we'll go through that in a bit more detail. So again, back at DeepMind in London, I kind of made this kind of prediction, and this was a few years back. Thankfully, now it is 2025. But I talked about the fact that actually 35% of today's work activities could be automated, and I still believe this is a very sensible number based on what I've talked to the analysts at Gartner, Forrester, IDC, Bloor. I've been engaging quite heavily with them over the last few years, really trying to drive and establish where this industry is going for AI augmented testing specifically, and also more importantly for the major waves and quadrants that are going to be released in 2025. So let's just take that number, that 35 prediction, right? And I could probably partially argue that I was right at that point in time. And so, this is one of the end conferences I did last year in Vienna. I did 56 events last year. I did over 100 events the year before. I'm hoping to drop that in 2025 and maybe do some more virtual. But Diego, again, who I spent a few days with in London this week, he predicted last year in his keynote at the Forrester event that, 2020 to 2024, we really saw productivity using these kind of tools anywhere between 15 and 20%. And I'm going to stop there with the viewpoint of these are tools that are specific to a particular industry or capability, right? So you're building a agentic AI that just does testing, or you're doing an automation tool that just helps you self-heal your page objects. It's very narrow. It's very, within your own group, shall we say. It's not wide across the SDLC. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I go to the far right-hand side where I say, well, actually these tools that can talk to other tools, and I know 90% of you are probably saying, well, isn't agentic AI just agents that are just talking to each other? And I'll say the answer is definitely no, right? So yes, there are agentic endpoints that will be able to exchange and do that thinking and creating activity independently, but you will have them design and requirements, talking to UX, talking to performance, talking to security, talking to a specialist on accessibility who's looking at the European Accessibility Act that starts in June this year. And, they'll all be exchanging conversations. And we're talking about AI, we're talking about the ability for them to communicate and then bring the human or the tester back into the loop and say, as an oversight, is this right? What do you think about this? They really want at every point to bring the AI workforce touch points in. So then the productivity increases, right? And yes, you probably say, oh, well, I use GitHub Copilot as a developer. I'm getting 20% extra productivity. You may say, oh, well, I'm also using cursor.com for creating playwrights and Selenium scripts, and I'm getting 20% productivity. It's probably quite accurate for a particular activity, but not across your entire activity set. So this is where I think we're moving into phase 2 of this generative and agentic kind of space, where we're really going to see much more value, and we're not focusing on just prompt engineering and what I call shadow prompting. So I may be amazing at prompting, which I'm not. Jason might be much better than me, but I haven't got 15 Jasons. I've got whatever workforce, whichever thought process, chain of thought the human's doing, the prompts are going to reflect that. And I think that's really quite a negative thing. And I've been running prompt workshops and for the last 2 years. I'm not saying they're all redundant. It's the thinking aspect still very valid, but prompt engineering isn't the solution that we thought it was back in 2019 when this started out. So again, I did this think, create, learn model, and I published it on leanpub.com/digital, I think, maybe 15 years ago. And I was trying to build a framework to say, how do you operate within this new space? And I've applied that same model that I did 10, 15 years ago into what is in essence these Turing bots, these agentic AI agents for a second. And what they're really talking about is each one of those agentic endpoints has a thinking component, i.e. chain of thought, deep mind, whatever you want to call it. It has a creation capability, let's call it, for argument's sake, Minstrel of Experts, Nemo, or some quite sophisticated with a large context window, 128K or something, with some kind of RAG architecture or a graph RAG or a late chunking strategy, whatever that might be. And then there's a learning aspect on there as well, which is some ML. It might be some TensorFlow, it might be some traditional techniques, some traditional algorithms that you would do to do that feedback of the learning and capabilities back into the thing. So again, these concepts, which on the right-hand side become, in essence, Gen Ops or whatever they want to call it, these Gen Apps, I think they call it, they want to be able to do this very quickly. So we're unlocking this capability, but I want to introduce today the concept of, well, how do you assure that these internal AI productivity things are giving the right output? Agentic AIs are giving the right output. The AI infused systems are giving the right output. What is your new role? If I was going to be naive for a second, I could say, okay, we've all heard of quality or test assurance, but what is AI assurance? Why is this so much different? Isn't test assurance the same thing, but we're just doing it for AI? And I'd partly say, AI is testing. It's very close knit testing loops, feedback loops. Therefore, our role evolves over this next generation, where we can become incredibly valuable as an AI assurance resource or an AI engineer, probably less valuable if we're lower down the tool chain. So anyway, let's have a look at these and look at some of the practical frameworks that you would sit across that. Governance, risk, transparency, accountability, ethical practices, whatever else that might be at each part. And that could be the thinking activity, which is down here on the left hand side, where you're doing the fail fast hypothesis. You might be doing solution thinking or some other methodology, all the way to the operational side on the right hand side, where you're doing the observability of your site reliability engineering or quality testing, observability, whatever it may be. At each part of this, there'll be an activity which you should be involved with. So let's just quickly overlay this, right? Let's make it really easy and just say, we took those 3 core principles: think, make, or think, create, and learn. So if we think of the first one, which is the think aspect, the capabilities that we've been building and we've developed over the last 2-3 years is the ability to do requirements engineering to test design. Sounds like a simple activity, and I could partially argue that probably 50% of our time, or depending on where you sit within it, if you're a classical tester or if you're just exploratory or agile, SDLC, whatever it may be. The next bit is the other way around, because we got this huge thing where people were like, well, we don't have requirements, which baffles me based on the fact that you've got user stories, you've got conversations you're having, you've got transcripts. They're all requirements. Whereas test to requirements is, well, at the moment we've got some tests which probably represent some requirements, and hopefully you've got requirements traceability. But if not, you could probably retro-engineer what that test pack represents quite easily. It's a bit of a nuanced way of doing it. The next one is what I've spent the last 10-12 years is model-based testing. I was part of the ISO 29119 Part 8 for putting the standard together for model-based testing. So building things like digital twin definition languages, really complex and intricate, extensions of things like XPDL, extendable process definition languages. Then we've had the wave of the what I would call just Gherkin, so ATDD, BDD, TDD, Dan North, Elizabeth Hendrickson, whoever it is. They're still used, these executable specs, because they help bridge the gap between the three amigos or even to the business at push. And then going all the way back to Tom Gill, requirements engineering, things like Planguage for unambiguous languages. And then more a nod to Paul Gerard for his new Defo Spam. I say new, it's about 15 years old, but structure around requirements engineering that you can apply to user stories. So taking all of those thinking activities and then just moving on to create. So at the moment we can create requirements, we can create tests, we can create Gherkin, we can create code. And 4 years ago I launched our first generative AI, went to Gartner, presented it and said, look, we can create code and run automation code in seconds, and nobody was interested, right? Code generation and automation is not that exciting right now. When it's bread and butter in a way, but also being able to deal with not only code generation, but now what's replaced code generation is these large action models that I'll be talking to you in a little bit more detail about later on. This is really the new focus. Things like PyAuto test, the new frameworks, some which I can't share because it's in our IP, but things like Omniposer, UFO, and others really avoid having to do scripting at all, because they do the chain of thought at runtime, and then they use things like YOLO or Pixtual for large vision models to actually be able to look at what's on the screen and provide some feedback. So very sophisticated capabilities that we're using and developing. And then of course the learning, right? We're learning from what we design, what we create, what we optimize, what results we get, what predictions we can see from the data, from observed data in production. We're looking at all of these different things. So quite a lot of capability that we're talking about here. So AI assurance across the landscape, across agentic AI architectures for a second. So I just want to, I'm not going to go through this in too much detail because I don't have much time, but I wanted to just throw down, and you can go and look at these in your own time really. Some of the big things. The first thing I threw in there was the 2nd of February this year came into force the new AI literacy and bans across Europe. So if you operate in Europe and you're using ChatGPT, you're most likely going to get a huge fine, or you should be getting a fine. We saw what happened with GDPR. It's the equivalent as GDPR for misuse of AI, even with AI in the workforce. So AI literacy talks about AI workforce. So if I'm using it for legal, or I'm using it for healthcare decisions, don't do that. Even if I'm using it for creating tests, you should not be sharing your IP to ChatGPT, Claude, Anthropic, whoever, right? Even DeepMind. So that's the first one, and then the second one, obviously, I can't not say, and this is your opportunity to scan the screen very quickly. Is back when I was on the working group for 29119 Part 11 for building artificial intelligence systems or testing artificial based systems, I wrote this book. You can download that for free. I'd recommend downloading it in a browser, then you can just right click and save the file down as a PDF. Great book, and obviously I mentioned and introduced a way of testing AI infused systems using this gated AI methodology, which I go into a bit more detail of the work that I did at MIT during COVID and a few other things. So really interesting around, again, principles around assurance and building trustworthy systems. The next thing, which again will hurt everyone, is what you see on the far right is the 29119 part 11, which is the AI thing. You can see things like there about some of the definitions of things that you need to be able to test, and characteristics of systems and bias and etc. etc. And then what you see on the left hand side is the new ISO 42001. And so that's interesting because that's the new kind of equivalent of the quality standards that every organization needs to implement, which is this model on the left hand side around explainability, model ops, all the kind of the basic stuff that you should know in your AI governance role or your AI assurance role. And you probably see that there's only a handful of people that have done the 42,000. And I think this is going to be huge, right? I think this will be at least the minimum requirement for every organization that's trading publicly. I think you'll have zero leeway not to do this, right? Especially if you're building AI systems. And so usually I put this kind of in there in the sense of don't share any of your leakage of your data with any kind of external model. Go and just download LM Studio or Llama or whatever you want to do, and just start using Llama probably is the way to do it, or even DeepMind, and run it on your Raspberry Pi. But really what we're talking about is what you see in the middle, which is companies like Keysight. Back in 2024, we issued our usage guide, our policy internally, and this is the first AI policy of many. And we have a Keysight.ai run by the ex-Apple head of AI who's come into the organization. And you've got to put these policies and guidelines in place because you've got to be able to report those to the government frameworks. Otherwise, again, you'll get hit with these fines. So I don't want to echo it too much, but this slide's way too complicated. But the whole point, what I'm trying to cover here, is this is incredibly complicated. We started building prompt chains, prompt threading, where they go off and do individual activities, variants of deviations of different thought process, of chain of thought, shall we say. And then you've got these domain-specific models that are starting to gain. You've got Poly AI for model agnostic. And then you've got things like AI Trism's frameworks that are setting in. And then the stuff that we're doing around things like graph RAG architectures, which again, I don't think we're really going to have time to go through today, but are really quite important when you're looking at auditability of these very complex systems, so that on the right hand side, when you ask it a simple question like test all of the Death Star requirements, within a few seconds it'll say, oh, there's a thermal exhaust vent, you need to cover this up, otherwise somebody might be able to blow it up. This kind of capability and auditability is really kind of where we're going and where we're at the moment. So again, a few extra slides just because I want to hammer the point in. What you see on the screen is the questions we've been answering because we operate in the US. We're based out in Santa Rosa. The exec order 14110, came into force, and therefore we get these kind of questions of, okay, give us the explainability of your models, right? How do you do, how are you using model agnostic? How are you proving the bias or looking at data drift? How are you measuring all of this stuff? We have to provide them the evidence, and in a way we have to align with the compliance of and this is just a subset of some of the AI compliance documents, which I would say probably everybody on this call's probably not had a chance to read through any of those, or at least understand all of them, right? So I think we're a long way from where we need to be, and we're probably going to struggle when we're trying to keep up at the pace of where everybody else is when it comes into AI and how to assure and test AI. So I'm going to leave a couple of things which I hoped are going to give you the takeaways that are going to be valuable for you to be able to go off and do. The first one is there's a lot of legislation coming in, a lot of liability coming in by August. So you've still got a bit of time before you're really going to get stuck under the bus with a lot of this, because they are giving a bit of leeway, but not a lot. And the second thing, is around governance framework. So for those who've been on LinkedIn, you'll have seen this Microsoft's AI tour, which they've been doing in South Africa. And this is one of the slides they give, which looks like any PwC framework for a second. But really, it's these are the pillars which they're recommending as an operating framework, very similar to the AI TRISM stuff, in all fairness. But managing model gardens, if you don't know what a model garden is, then again, you probably need some time to get to really do some research on this kind of stuff. And I'm going to kind of end with a few kind of really kind of hopefully quick points, right? The first one is, the AI is definitely not going to jail, so, it's the people who are going to be responsible for it. And then secondly, I just wanted to show you a few very quick demos. So this is the first demo I want to quickly show you. So this is Claude computer use on the left. This is, of course, a very well-known OpenAI operator launched on the 23rd of January. These are both what I would refer to as large action and large vision models. The large vision model is looking at the screen and doing the YOLO and an analysis. The large action model, the UFO or whatever else that they're using underneath, is actually doing the interaction with the screens. You can see on the left for the keen-eyed view, that's a full desktop. On the right-hand side, you can tell, obviously, that's a browser. So this is, already happening. This is the end of any automation engineer, and you can also see both of them are doing chain of thought. With that, it would be hard not to actually point out chain of thought, and this is less than 2 minutes, going from me downloading it, which is literally Olama run DeepSeek R1, download the 4.7 thing, which you can actually run on a Raspberry Pi 4 on the right hand side, and then I'm giving it a prompt, which is probably one of the worst prompts I've ever written, where I'm just saying build some decision trees, do some state transition diagrams, apply some boundary value analysis or whatever, classification trees, whatever you wanted to do. And then what you see it doing, which is going to be incredibly fast because I know my time's up now, is it's going through it and it's doing the chain of thought thinking. Okay, that chain of thought's coming through now, and you can see it's saying, well, first I'd like to do this, then I'd try and do that, and then if I can't do that, I will try this afterwards. I'll assign some risk, I'll add some quantitative scales that'll do. And then, of course, it's just plowing out, sense talk code. It's plowing out maps that it thinks it can get through the system. It's adding, creating test cases to give it the levels of different severity, creating some very formatted gherkin. It's got everything. It's just going through and just completing it in one big chain of thought. And again, this will run on anything at any time and generate playwright, whatever coding you want to do. So you can see here, this is the last presentation I did in Spain last year. And you can even see there's chain of thought and visualization of thought techniques. These aren't new just because DeepMind's managed to make them, very small. But this is the architecture that we internally use for building our agentic AI. And you'll see that it's a lot more than a large language model or some traditional ML. This goes beyond it and really thinks about putting structure around it. So I'm on a panel discussion later on. Look forward to answering your questions, and hopefully you've at least taken a few thought processes away of what you need to do next to be able to operate in this new world.